Hello, welcome back to another episode of Japan Business Time After Work with
Rochelle Cobb
from Japan Intercultural Consulting. Our topic today close to both of our hearts.
Yes.
For this is a whole 1 hour episode.
But I know it could be. Mergers and acquisitions.
Mergers and acquisitions. It sounds boring and technical, but it's really not. And we're going to explain why.
Yes.
Nihonjon, Sasuga Nihonjon. It's a great topic. The challenges for Japanese companies when they get involved in international M&As and what happens when your company's been bought out by a Japanese corporation.
Or you're a Japanese company you've been bought by a Western corporation.
That's right.
Yes.
Both of our bread and butter. So we'll try to talk about this concisely after this break. The Japanese have landed. This is the whole scenario that your business is probably based upon in part. You know, it's like
it is a significant business stream for us. Yes.
And I used to do M&A, and I know M&A sounds like everyone imagines Gordon Gekko and Wall Street, and it sounds all technical and financy and all that sort of stuff. But what it's about companies getting married, and international marriages tend to be the most challenging.
Complicated, yes.
And so when we talk about these international corporate marriages, what are the particular features and challenges of M&As involving Japanese companies?
Okay. Well, what I would say just to begin with is that, in general, 50% of all mergers fail.
Yeah.
And even with among companies from the same culture, because different corporate cultures are very hard to put together.
Yeah.
So you have that as a basic fact.
Yeah.
And then you have on top of it the radically different corporate culture of a Japanese firm and a non-Japanese firm.
Yeah.
And the language barrier.
Yeah.
And the style differences.
Yeah.
I see a lot of situations too where you have a rather staid conservative Japanese company buying a scrappy entrepreneurial American firm, and so then you have that corporate culture difference that goes beyond the national culture.
Yeah.
So you just have a whole lot of other levels of things that can go wrong, basically.
And even as you listed those things off, I was just thinking, wow, that really sounds like the international marriage thing. You talk about the percentage of failure, the corporate, the language, it literally is. I mean, companies are kind of complicated. They have personalities, they have cultures, they have backgrounds.
Yes.
And people, when they do M&As, just like when they get married, there's all of this optimism.
Right.
People just see the positives. It's great that they're different.
Synergy.
They have synergies, but it's great that they're different. They're going to bring all this new energy. I'm going to learn so much from them.
But no one at that stage thinks about how are we actually going to put it together.
Yeah.
And how are we going to work together? How are we going to communicate? No one talks about those issues.
We're all friends in this room. We can work it out.
Right, but they don't have a plan for working it out.
Yes.
And so then what happens a year and a half later, they call me and they say, we're at each other's throats, can you help?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
I've done this from so in a way, I used to when on my law firm days, I would be involved in the arrangement and the sale and the execution of these M&As. I was the wedding planner.
Right.
And Rochelle's the 1.5 years later marriage counselor.
Marriage counselor, yes, exactly.
And occasionally...
I have some clients that are wise and they call me during the wedding preparations.
Very good.
And they say, let's get some pre-marriage counseling. And those are the ones that work better.
And I would always recommend prenups, but they don't want them. They don't like detail. No one likes to think about a detailed prenup.
But pre-marriage counseling, that helps a lot.
And believe me, I've handled a few divorces as well. Corporate divorces. I've been
not pleasant, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, varying degrees. Sometimes, again, there's relief that they're getting apart, but there's acrimony and just watching how these things fall apart sometimes. So yeah. So and definitely on the first end, when you're doing due diligence of a company and you're saying, wow, this is a company of, really local, really sort of old-fashioned. No, these guys probably never left the country before on this side, and this Japanese corporation doing their first ever M&A. They're from the back and beyond of Japan. They've got all this cash sitting in the safe. Right. The yen is strong. They want to go off.
But a lot of times now, the companies that are doing the acquisitions are not very global ones.
Well, that's it.
Or it's a very non-global division of a company that maybe other divisions did global stuff, and so they often don't know what they're getting into.
And
they're very naive.
Yeah, there's definitely that. And what I'd find is that, for example, when you've got a Japanese manufacturer from some rural part of Japan, maybe when they acquire small Japanese companies, like maybe there's a supplier that's in trouble, but it makes a part that they need, so they come in and say, oh, we'll buy you, we'll keep your business going, just keep doing what you're doing. But after they buy them, they'll just let them keep doing what they're doing.
Right.
And they expect to take this philosophy overseas. And I think there is kind of a view. I've seen transactions where Japanese companies have gone abroad and they've gone in saying, look, we're just going to be completely hands off. We just want you under our umbrella.
Right.
But it's actually, if there is that in itself becomes a source of real problems really fast.
Right.
Because the Japanese think that they're just allowing them to be autonomous, they're trusting them. But then the other side hears no communication or whatever sometimes, and they're feeling like, well, what's going on here or whatever. But of course, then you have the other thing as well, where they can come in and be too intrusive.
That happens too. And the big thing I get is the Japanese will buy the American firm, and they're sending the Shisatsudan, the teams to come in and gather information and fill out these million reports, and they just kind of smother them.
Yeah. With love.
They think it's love. But from the American side, it's like, we don't have this information. We don't normally gather this information. We don't normally put it in this format. We don't have enough people to do this.
Yeah.
It's a very common issue.
I mean, I've seen and I've dealt with situations, for example, where national and corporate cultures can collide when you've got, and I've seen this between US and Japanese company M&As, where you've got very entrepreneurial, high risk-taking, proactive, get as much product, generate and get as many products out the door as possible. Yeah. You're judged by your product, literally by your productivity, how much product you create. Japanese tend to have this thing about being very conservative, being very wait, careful, get the right product.
Right.
So when you merge companies with these kinds of different philosophies, I've seen a situation where the American company, having been used to putting out, having 10% of stuff rejected and 90% of product going out, was having 90% of stuff rejected, and they were convinced that the parent company was just trying to kill them, was trying to wipe them out by just rejecting all their stuff.
Yeah.
And they were feeling like they were being invalidated for their hard work.
Yeah.
And you let this go. Literally, a year is way more than enough. Everybody is just miserable, and they're starting to whistle blow and make claims and you find out, you go in, you ask questions, you find out it's just these huge disconnects.
Fundamental difference in how you approach what you're doing that was never talked about before.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh boy. Yeah.
So, in the big categories, I mean, in terms of companies that you've seen who have called you up because they've struggled with post-merger integration, with the moving in and living together phase after the marriage, when it's going bumpy, he leaves the toilet seat up, he cooks once a month and thinks he's doing half of the work or whatever, and he doesn't get it and she doesn't get it. What are the things are there patterns that you see of things that tend to be particularly prone to disconnecting?
Oh boy, I mean, it really runs the gamut because it depends on each situation.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of variations of what you just described, where it's excuse me, it's different approach.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's a big company versus an entrepreneurial company.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a company that emphasizes sales versus a company that emphasizes engineering.
Yeah.
There's usually just some major differences that no one talked about explicitly and no one worked out.
Yeah.
And then they just start to fester. And then you also have individual style differences.
Yeah.
Or communication that's not working well, or expectations that were never validated and then are clashing. I mean, it's just all these things can happen, and usually several at once.
Yeah. And and the other thing, again, maybe a bit like a marriage, the things in the beginning, even when you see them, you don't think they're going to be a big deal. I'll be fine with that, but they become bigger and bigger sort of over time. They become, if left unaddressed. And for all the things that we talk about in all 4 seasons of this, all of we're not complaining. We're talking about these things because awareness of these things makes you more able to address them and not let them grow up into things which can actually lead to companies breaking up. And
and just also destruction of value.
Yeah.
Just destruction of value. I've seen Japanese companies come in and buy firms in the U.S. for millions of dollars,
Yeah.
And a few years later, all the American key employees have left.
Yes.
The business is a shell of its former self, and that just the value was all gone.
Yeah.
It's very wasteful.
Yeah.
And then lots of people were very unhappy.
Yeah.
And, it's very sad to see.
Yeah.
So I try to help people avoid those situations.
Yeah. And it's part of, what I hope one thing that you take from watching the series is that you can understand what you're getting into when you're starting an arrangement with the Japanese company, what their expectations are,
right.
and start to be thinking ahead from the earliest possible stages to, okay, well, are they going to expect me to report back frequently? We're going to talk about that soon.
Right.
Are they going to be expected the work? Is my performance going to be evaluated differently?
Right.
What is my boss? How does he or she think?
Uh-huh.
And all these sorts of things which you're not too worried about in the beginning, but being aware of these things allows you to come up with strategies and to understand what's going on, because these things fall into this sort of confusion and disarray because people on both sides don't understand what's going on.
Right.
M&A is really where the rubber meets the road of all the things that we're talking about, and in the best and worst ways.
Right.
When it works, it's fantastic, and that's what we both strive for,
right.
and it is achievable and it happens, but it requires, like a good marriage, an
a lot of effort,
a lot of mutual effort
yes.
and work and understanding, and frankly never taking it for granted that it's going to work is really the key.
Right. Yes. Well said. Yes.
We could do this for hours, but we are going to leave it there tonight. We'll probably come back to a subject like this at some point. We're going to be back next week. We've only got enough time for a couple more episodes, so hang around and for more Japan Business Time after work with
Rochelle Kopp.
See you next week.